So, and here he is. Welcome on stage, Philippe. And he'll be giving lessons for European entrepreneurs entering the US market. And now welcome him, please.
Thank you.
And maybe just one word ahead. Really make sure to ask questions. It's a great opportunity.
Totally.
You'll follow up on that.
Thank you so
Enjoy
much.
yourself.
So, hi, my name is Philippe Suchet, and good afternoon. I'm so happy to be here today. And by the way, thank you very much for inviting me and allowing me to discover Slovenia. This was my first, and I hope not my last time here, because it's really a beautiful gem. So what I thought we would do today, and as you can tell, I don't have like slides in the background, is I thought it would be more interesting to kind of have a conversation. So I'm hopeful that at some point, either you're going to raise your hand and ask questions or type some of those questions, and it'd be more of a, an interactive dialogue that we would have. So what I was thinking, though, to start with, would be first to tell you a little bit about my own history and the stuff that I've done in the past, and you'll understand a bit of the entrepreneurial part of my journey. And then tell you about some of the insights that I've collected over I would say something like 15 years of entrepreneurship in the US. And I would say insights more than lessons, because those are often anecdotes and observations and learnings from me. But again, I don't know who I am to be able to really give lessons, so I'll share insights, I would say. So let's start with my personal journey. So I grew up in France and in Africa as well, and somehow I really loved data and business growing up. So I ended up starting selling and buying stuff at like 13. I had my stockbroker at 14, and then at 18-year-old I started investing in real estate. Now I come from a family where studies are important, so I ended up going to engineering school and then business school. Lived in Asia, Japan, South Korea, went back to Europe, a bit of London and Paris, and then moved to the US for business school, East Coast, and we are in the mid-90s. Now, what's interesting then is I came from Europe where there was no email, nothing, and I show up in the US, and suddenly I see that the internet is taking off, and we had no clue about any, at that stage in Europe where, for most of us, we're pretty far behind. So I finished business school, and I feel like this is not the appropriate time to go back to Europe. I have to go, and I've always dreamt about starting companies versus doing this kind of stuff that I was doing on the side. And so I decided to head to California. So we are in toward the end of the 90s. At that point, toward late 99, I started my first company. I started my first company, and I gathered a group of amazing co-founders, and we build a plan, we start going and raising money. We end up raising a few millions. And then, as you know, this is early 2000. The whole thing crashes pretty quickly. So we are in the middle of the bubble, and it burst pretty dramatically. And I would say most of the companies that were at the time started with us, unfortunately died. And I would say, potentially the majority of them had interesting businesses, but it was basically a long winter for a lot of us. We managed to survive through this really tough times and ended up becoming very profitable. What we did was we basically built a solution that would allow large corporations to customize interactions in real time, so that when you would show up on a website, you would start seeing content that is tailored to you, even if this was your first visit. We were among also the first to do behavioral targeting on banner ads, as well as email, so that you don't get the same email as everybody else. It's really based on who you are. And we use a lot of the behavioral data. Now, we're talking about the early 2000s. Today, I think it sounds like pretty normal, but at the time it was relatively unique. And it was harder, by the way, because we were way ahead of our time. And we can talk a little bit about this, but it's never a great idea to be way ahead of your time. So anyway, we did that, and we were able to sell very large corporations. Deals were in the hundreds of thousands to $1 million per year per deal. And we had a SaaS solution, by the way. We were again, a bit ahead, but we were delivering a solution where we had the technology, the expertise, and we ended up having pretty amazing results. Usually 20 to 30% increase of conversion and 4 to 15x ROI. So we were able to close quite a number of large corporations. We ended up, as I mentioned, becoming very profitable, and then we were approached by a bunch of companies, and we ended up selling the company a few years down the road to a company called Axiom Corporation, which is, I think, the largest consumer data company in the US. Their market cap must be in the billions now. A very large corporation that we integrated, and if you want, we can even talk about, how do you go from being a startup to being integrated by a very, very significant US corporation. So we did that. I stayed a bit at Axiom. I then, wanted to take some time off. I didn't. I kept on doing real estate on the side, so I built a few buildings. And then I went back. This time was because of the iPhone. I got really excited, and I thought, wow, it's a revolution that's going to truly transform retail. So I went back and I started another company, once again, in San Francisco again. And our idea was that there was way too much friction associated with payment. In general, online, but specifically on mobile. Now, granted, 1% of the traffic at the time for online retailers was mobile. Now, today, it's way over 50%. So we're talking about 2010. Anyway, we started doing that, and we built a solution called InstaBuy that allow people to buy in 1 or 2 clicks directly from the Facebook, Google, Pinterest of this world. So what we thought is there's no reason why you should go and type any kind of things on a retailer's website. You see something somewhere on the site that you like, even on a banner ad, you can click, you just have to identify yourself, and you can buy from hundreds of retailers. So we developed this, we had hundreds of retailers onto the platform, we ended up also being approached, and then we sold to another large US corporation called Shopzilla that I ended up also joining afterwards. And then fast forward, after that, I thought, I'm going to stop being an entrepreneur. It's been somewhere around 15 years, so I'm going to do something else. I'm going to relax a little bit more, which I realize I cannot, but anyway, I tried. And so I ended up doing a bunch of things. First, doing a bunch of direct investment in US corporations, European and Israeli tech companies. And we can talk about this, but I have a pretty significant portfolio. I also joined a firm called Spider Capital. Now, Spider basically is a company that is based out of San Francisco, where I spent most of the last 20 years. And what they do is they focus on seed plus companies, so companies that are, I would say, early stage, but have already some kind of commercial traction. And they invest. I mean, we invest hundreds of thousands of dollars in our initial funding. But what I would say separates us from the rest of the market is we have a very active role in helping the companies. We have a bunch of advisors, and we really we don't want to make investment, we really want to help companies. And as such, we've invested in a number of companies that are not Americans and help them with their go-to-market strategy in the US, and we'll talk a little bit more about this in a few minutes. I'm also a director at The Family, which is a leading European accelerator. And what's, I mean, I'm sure you know them, but they basically have 3 locations in Europe, Paris, Berlin, and London, and helping European entrepreneurs with fulfilling their dreams. So those are some of the core things that I do. I do a bunch of other things on the side. Now let's talk about the learning / insights about being kind of a foreign entrepreneur in the US. And I'm curious, by the way, and as a show of hand, maybe who in this room is kind of entrepreneur or working in a company that is trying or entering the US market. Can you just raise your hand if you're... Okay, wow. So maybe like a good third of the room. Very cool. So I'll tell you about a few things, and we'll start with anecdotes, a few things that for me were really interesting with this experience. I'll start with when I was at business school. So what happened then, so I was sponsored by a significant US consulting firm. I had really interesting jobs, or other jobs lined up, but I decided I'm moving to California, as I mentioned. And I started sending resumes. Now, granted, I was not American, had never worked in the US, I was not like many of you here, technology whiz, and so on and so forth, so there were a lot of things against me. I was rejected like 99.9% of the time. And my friends were kind of making fun of me because why don't you do consulting or banking or go back to Europe? Why are you trying to make it complex by moving to California and working in tech? But that was my plan. And so what I decided, it's not working. So I took my backpack and I moved to California. Now what was interesting then is and I think it's rare, is like when you're physically there, magic happens. Now, I come from a family of immigrants who came to France. I'll tell you, the magic didn't happen for them. You come to France and you're an immigrant, or in many countries, people are not putting the red carpet. No, that's okay, but it's not so easy. In the US, when you move and you really like fight hard, it really doesn't matter who you are, like as a nationality. It doesn't matter if you're like Slovenian, French, whatever, Israelis, Iranian, whatever it is. It's all about you, and when you go physically to a place, you can really change the dynamic. Now, why can you do that? First of all, because Americans love networking. We network, we meet each other, we try to figure out how we can work with each other, we make introduction to new people, and so on and so forth. When you come to a foreign country, most of the time, it's really hard to enter different communities. Especially, I would say, potentially in California, but I would say it's beyond that. But in San Francisco, you go there, and if you're really focused on networking, helping the community, you're going to be helped as well. And so pretty quickly, you'll find yourself in a situation where you have many opportunities. And so first, I think core learning for me was, if you really want to make an impact somewhere in the US, move there, start networking, you will be accepted, and if you deliver value, if you're a tremendous individual, very quickly you'll be able to make an impact. But thinking that you can do that, remotely from wherever is a very hard, I would say it's a very hard sell, even if in some cases it could be doable, but it's super hard. Now, let's say for a minute that we say, okay, that's cool, that makes sense, but should we really move there? I mean, we can go there and spend a lot of time, but should we move there? So my experience has helped, I don't know how many foreign startups, quite a bit from Israel, I would say, and they have a bit of a recipe there, because they can't sell to the region. They usually have their technology team in Israel, and they move the commercial operation to the market that they are interested in, and it's mostly the US. But the point for me is, even if you feel, no, in fact, let's step back. If the US is a core market for you, and I say if because it could be a situation where you're trying to sell to the whole world, and so you cannot potentially do what I'm going to suggest doing. But let's say the US is really a core market for you. My belief is you have to move key members of your team to the US. So I remember working with this French corporation, they didn't do that. They wanted the core team to move there. And so they started hiring Americans, and it was really hard. There was like constantly issues, they were making decisions at the headquarters in Europe, and the Americans were not understanding the decisions, there was a lot of politics involved, it was a nightmare. If truly you believe that the US market is critical for your operation, move people there, and specifically move some of the heads of the company. Now, again, you can succeed without doing that, but if you want to maximize the chance that you will succeed, I believe you should do that. Now, when you do that, obviously you don't want to move the whole team. You want to move, hopefully, commercially minded CEOs or entrepreneurs, the head of the company, but that can, sell and potentially raise money and so on and so forth. And he or she is going to have to obviously, go back and forth, but relocate himself or herself to whatever place in the US that you think makes the most sense. Now, that's going to be very important in many things. That's going to be very important because it's going to help with hiring, it's going to help with sales, it's going to help with fundraising, it's going to help with building a company's culture and so on and so forth. And I believe that for me, it's the cornerstone. Now, a lot of entrepreneurs resist that. Then, I believe that the US strategy, especially if you're like selling to corporations in the US or raising money there, it's going to be very hard to implement. So I would say for me, that was a critical factor, and I've seen companies either not doing it like halfway or so on and so forth, has not, in my own experience, it has not worked, and I believe that it was potentially the wrong kind of approach. Now, the other element is where, if you said, okay, that's fine, we're moving, or at least like the CEO moves, or whatever, so some key member of the team is moving to the US, where do we move? So on this, I would say, and I may be a bit of a contrarian here, I would tell you, don't believe the hype. Meaning that a lot of people, and I've seen some of my portfolio companies that have moved to San Francisco. Why do you move to San Francisco? Because it's next to Facebook, Google, there are all these tech guys, this is the place that I need to be. It's not the right way to really think about it. What you really need to look at is where am I gonna sell? Do I need to raise money? What kind of talent am I looking for? And with all of this, you need to figure out what makes the most sense. So if you're, let's say, in Slovenia, and you're trying to move to California just because it's really cool to be in San Francisco, this is wrong. Now, if you say, look, all my partners, they're up and down, Silicon Valley, all the core investors that I want to convince, they are there. Like, there is a commercial reason for me to be there. Makes sense. Now, understand that this comes at a significant cost, because you're going to have tremendous time difference between the different locations. It's going to be a nightmare whenever I'm going to be flying back and forth. I personally hate jet lag. I don't know about you guys, but for me, it kills me. I mean, there are a lot of things. San Francisco, insanely expensive right now. You know, hiring people, everybody wants to hire people. I mean, you just look at the salary and you'll understand, you know, the supply and demand. It's a hard place to be. Now, granted that for some companies, it makes a huge difference. But it's not an obvious answer like, I'm moving to the US, it's called San Francisco. It's not, and we've seen the emergence of a lot of other interesting markets, like even in California, let's say Los Angeles, for example, New York, Boston. I mean, there are many other ecosystems that are interesting. And I've seen, for example, recently I've advised a bunch of companies, they ended up moving to the middle of the US, but it was perfect for them. The costs were under control, the time difference was much more manageable. Most of their customers were not too far, didn't have to fly, you know, all the way to the East Coast or whatever all the time. And it ended up being good. One of the companies, by the way, that I invested in, I would say off the record, but we're like on the record. Anyway, moved to California, an amazing company. They did it, I think, maybe because of a bit of the hype. Now, the CEO was ultra smart after some point realized, you know what, that's the wrong place to be for us. It doesn't really help us. Move from the West Coast to the East Coast. And I thought it was a really smart thing. So again, if you want to move, consider carefully which location would make the most sense, and there is not an obvious one answer, which is called San Francisco in my mind. The other thing that I think I would say, and maybe the last thing, and I'd love to see if you guys have some questions, so feel free to type them or raise your hand, is for me, one of the key learning was the US mentality is dramatically different. I grew up in France, I grew up in Africa, I lived in Asia, I lived in a bunch of places. The US was really hard. I'll tell you a few short stories, maybe one. My first hires of salespeople. So I go, and I'm like, you know, we're selling to big corporation, I need to hire a bunch of sales guys. I go and I try to hire people, and then I meet people, and I'm like, for a lot of those meetings, I would walk away from the meeting and think, why am I running this business? Like, this guy is like 10x. He's so good, he's so successful, he's so incredible. I was blown away by the people I would meet. I'm like, it's impossible, I don't understand. Maybe I should hire that person and have him run my company, because he's so much better than me. Now, I can tell you I hired some of them, and they were not so much better. But the US, people, look, in Europe, where I come from in France, if we have a grading system from 0 to 20, if you are average, you're going to get a 10. That doesn't work like this in the US. It's 0 to 4, and if you are average, you don't get a 2. You get 3, 3.5, whatever. You're very close to 4. There's the US, system is such that we tell kids, believe in yourself, you are amazing, you're going to do incredible stuff. Where I grew up is no, that's not good enough. Yeah, I know, you had a good grade this time, but you can do better. So for me, we come from a place where we always, look down at the stuff that we do, and always are overly humble. Americans are not. And so for me, when I would meet somebody who would say, wow, I'm so good, I've closed all this deal, I can do this, I'm like, wow, I take it, for face value. No. I had to take the filter, which is, I'm talking to an American sales guy. I mean, a sales guy and an American sales guy, and I have to then decipher. And it happens quite a bit. The problem for us is to understand this. We don't understand the language. The same way I could not understand the language when I would go and see a VC and they say, wow, that's really interesting. I'm really captivated by what you say. You should come back and see me in a few months. I really love it. I would come back to the team. I'm like, guys, I think this is really hard. It's going to happen. No, you don't understand what they meant. Don't take it again for face value. You have to decipher again, take the filter. And so that's one of the key things. That's why early on, you need to figure out a way to learn. And I think for me, a few things. Number one, try to surround yourself potentially with advisors. Now, when you choose advisors, don't choose them for their names. Choose them for the value that they can bring. Try to bring really talented American members of your team, or even foreign-born, but people that understand the local cultures and can help you decipher this. And then specifically when it comes to salespeople, if you end up hiring salespeople in the US, I mean in general I would say, but particularly for us, foreign entrepreneurs, don't think that one is going to solve this, because your success rate, even if you were to understand the US mentality, the success rate is going to be very far from 100%. So hire many. Now, if it's engineers, for example, you're not going to be dealing with the issues that I've been dealing with. But if it's people that are commercially minded, you'll end up looking at many people and thinking, wow, I was so much more impressed the day I hired those guys than the day they started delivering. Anyway, so we can go on and on with insights. I hope this was helpful. But I'd love to now, have interaction, and I'm seeing a bunch of questions. So hold on, what is harder when you say? Okay, 2, and what would you point out as your biggest success? I mean, honestly, for me, I'm less interested. I'm more interested in whatever I can do to help you guys. Okay, so let's start maybe with question number 2. This is the thing. So it's interesting because indeed, there was, I think, a startup visa, and there's been some issue recently and so on and so on. In the US, you can make things happen. I'll tell you just one quick example. Another thing. When I started my first company, I had this guy that wrote to me. He was working in a garage in Florida. And I'm like, wow. And we're a hot internet startup in San Francisco. I'm like, the guy is crazy. And then I step back, it's not crazy. This is called the American dream. You can make it. And I'm pretty sure that later on, this guy moved to California and potentially he's a very successful executive now. Because it didn't matter who he was. He felt, I have this dream and I'm going to make it happen. This is how Americans work. This is what you need to integrate. You want to make it happen? Go, take your backpack. You'll figure out a way. You will figure out. There may not be a recipe with okay, number 1, you need to move as a student. Number 2, you start as a job. No, it's not maybe there's no maybe a very clear recipe. But if you want to make it happen, you go there and things will happen. You'll figure out a way. You will be, potentially, extraordinary visa. You'll find somebody to potentially, get you to, give you an H1B, whatever. There are plenty of ways. My belief is you show up there, obviously as a tourist visa. You don't try to, play with the system in the US. They're very strict. Huh? It's black or white. It's not like sometimes in Europe we have shade of gray. There it's black or white. So don't try to, play with the system. Initially show up as a tourist and say, 2 years there. You'll be in trouble. So go there, potentially as a tourist, and then figure out a way. And you will figure out a way. But you don't have to be totally clear from day one on what's going to happen and how you're going to make it happen. You will figure this out. Just go, kind of in the pool. Don't walk around like a startup. Don't walk around the pool. You go into the pool, you start swimming. You're going to, swallow a bit of water, but you'll figure out how to swim. So that's the thing. So potentially, yes, tourist visa. But what I hear from the question is, believe that you can make it happen, and you will, maximize the chance that it indeed does happen. So on the US corporation, it's interesting. I want to address that. This is a complex question, by the way, as well. Because US corporations, they are different. I see some of the VC firms, for example, the one that I'm associated with in San Francisco, we invest in US corporations. So sometimes we tell the foreign entities that are not US corporations to change and become US corporations. That's part of our kind of motto. We have to do that. Now, I don't know if it's the case for most VCs, but often I get, even when I introduce companies to, when we invest and we introduce companies to others, what we do, investors do that often. We work a lot with a bunch of other VCs. It works in every ecosystem. We know a bunch of other VCs. We send each other deal. And because we've worked together, we know who are, we believe, the most valuable and kind of impactful people in our networks, and we really try to get them involved. And when we see, for example, somebody who's not behaving well with a startup, we kind of put them on kind of the blacklist. But the bottom line is we work together now. So we send often deals to each other, obviously with the permission of the entrepreneurs. And often I get this question, US corporation or not US corporation. So I would say, again, it's a deeper question. Don't take me from okay, the prophet has spoken. But I believe that it's better. Now, again, there may be a bunch of other situations. And it's, you need to verify that fact. But my underlying feeling is that it does truly matter. Now, the second element that is also very important is investors will invest locally for a lot of them. If you really think that, you can raise from being in Slovenia and not having, kind of any, kind of physical presence there, it's going to be hard. People usually like to be able to go and see the entrepreneurs and sit with them. Now, we have invested in companies where they say, look, at some point I'm going to relocate. Maybe the technology is not stable enough yet. I need to get a few more pilots. I need to do this stuff. But at some point I'm going to relocate and I'm going to be not too far from you guys, and that helps us. Now, not too far maybe in the US, but I would say in general, the proximity is going to be a core factor. And again, proximity, in our case, if you are we are in San Francisco, if the corporation is in New York, it's okay. It's not the end of the world. Like, if we believe that it makes the most sense for them to be in New York. Now, a bunch of other VCs do not behave like this. They want a company that they can go to, while driving their car. But in many cases, I think that would be the second element that would be critical, which is some kind of physical presence. Now, granted, but let's say you build a company in Slovenia, you're doing, let's say, consumer app, it goes like crazy, it's a huge success, and it's sold all over the world. I think personally, as an investor, I'd be like, why do we want you guys to move? Like, makes perfect sense, they can stay where they are, and it's not coming as a, it doesn't hurt their strategy. So I'm sure some VCs will be, more willing to kind of consider, the fact that the company is far away as something that would be more acceptable. So anyway, so that would be the two things. Oh, wow. Okay, I have to take the first one. Like, sure. And the question is like, we have 20 seconds. This is a problem because I have a lot of those stories.
You have enough time for that question.
Huh? Oh, okay.
We'll give you enough time for that question.
Okay. So, wow, I don't know which one is the one. But anyway, so I'll tell you. This is something that made me really sad, in fact, is I had an investment in a company. The team was exceptional. Honestly, I looked at that team and I'm like, I've started 2 companies. Even with my second company, I was not at the level. And it's not the American thing. Like, those guys were like killers. They were so good. They were going after a market, massive market opportunity. Their initial success were incredible. Their metrics made everything made perfect sense. Except that there was a timing issue. And the timing issue is they were in the consumer lending business when, Lending Club, some of you may know, or Prosper went, not down, but got hammered. And for a bunch of reasons, it'd be too long to explain. But suddenly, like, debt holder and investors were like, oh, hold on, consumer lending, this is toxic, I want to separate myself a bit from that. And so what you ended up is, instead of having people look at the company and say, wow, they are amazing, like on every single dimension, they are great, they were like, no, this is consumer lending, I've been hurt, I have already 1 or 2 companies in my portfolio that are suffering, and the debt holder, because a lot of those things that was called peer-to-peer was not peer-to-peer, was like big, debt provider, that were, for example, the Lending Club of this world that were getting the debt, those guys like, we're not touching this anymore. Okay, you don't get debt, you don't get investment, what happens to company? If you don't have a quick path to profitability, you're out of business. That's what happened. That was for me the biggest, the worst investment failure. Now, there were a lot of learning associated with it, but one of the things that it taught me is that timing do truly matter. And there is some timing that you can control and some you cannot. I had companies, like, we were surrounded by companies, let's say, before September 11, that were about to raise. And I tell you, like, when September 11 happened, or even when the crash later happened, this thing was like, I'm sorry, the world is maybe coming to an end, I'm going to stop, I'm going to step back, and I'm going to look at this. And when you are a company that is not profitable, you cannot wait 6 months or 12 months until you Mr. Investor or Miss Investor is, figuring it out. So timing is critical. Even in our case, we almost died. I remember a company that was great, and they folded just a bit before the launch of the iPhone. But the iPhone would have changed their business tremendously. Because this was like a local, something that was like local. And obviously, like, how do you do something that is local when you just have access to a computer? It makes much more sense to have your smartphone. So now this is interesting, and Bill Gross, I don't know if you guys know him, it's one of the, I would say, fathers of the commercial internet, really amazing guy out of Pasadena, which I'm a big fan of, did a full study on this. And the guy has an incubator who's, he's seeded so many interesting companies. And again, he did that with numbers, and he looked at it, and he said the single most important factor is timing. And that's the thing. Now, there is timing you can control and timing you cannot control, but that's the core things to learn. And so when you are, for example, super early in your market, and you know that timing may not be appropriate, then act accordingly, and you will be potentially in a better shape. So that was one of the learning. Time is up, so I may have to go. I'm sorry about that, but I'll be around if you guys want to talk or anything. I'm here for you, so don't hesitate.
Thank you so much for this. It's been a pleasure.